Hey everyone, Desi's here with another video. Hope you're all having a fantastic day today. In this video, I want to talk about 10 books that I've read so far this year and really just share my opinions about them. I don't want to get too spoiler heavy, but if anyone watching this finds any of these books interesting or if they've read them themselves, I'd love to hear in the comments, and maybe if you want to pick it up if it sounds interesting. So without further ado, the first book I want to talk about that I've read is La Guerra Sucia. It is a Spanish book and it's pretty intermediate if you're practicing the language. I think it's written very well to be read in a fairly quick manner. There's a glossary in the back with any vocabulary, pretty much every word in the book, honestly, if there's anything tripping you up. I think this is a very good period piece of the Argentinian War, where the government was just covering up a lot of disappearances of children and just a lot of corruption in the government at the time. And this book kind of follows a reporter who is traveling to Argentina to kind of uncover what is going on during these harrowing events. And yeah, it gets pretty dark, but I think it's a very enlightening read for just kind of that time in history. And it's pretty short book too, so I think it's very accessible. It's just under 100 pages. So that's the first book that I want to talk about on this list. Not really the happiest one, but it is a book I've read, so throw that out there. The next three kind of come together as the Lord of the Rings trilogy: Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King. So I started this pretty much at the beginning of the year, 2025, and I finished it in probably about 2 months or so. And I don't really have any recollection of watching the movies before I read the books, so it was pretty fun to watch the movies pretty much for the first time after reading the books. And I mean, what it isn't there to say about the book? It's a classic fantasy, perfect world building and prose, and it's pretty much revolutionized the fantasy genre, and it's the foundation of it all pretty much. So definitely recommend it if you haven't read Lord of the Rings or want to give it a shot. A lot of like poetry and songs throughout the book, which I really appreciate as well. And yeah, Lord of the Rings trilogy, definitely give it a read if you haven't already, or maybe if you want to go give it a reread. I think it's probably worth it too for that. The next book I want to talk about is Emptiness Dancing by Adyashanti. This is kind of a spiritual text, just really talking about consciousness and just finding the emptiness from within, pretty much, just beyond your person, beyond your ego, beyond your goals and your thoughts that are constructed from external environments that are shaped by the world around us, kind of finding what's deeper within. And I think the way it's written is very positive and it feels very uplifting, which I appreciate when I read it. And I think the guy who wrote it seems like a very interesting person, and he definitely had a lot of interesting points to convey throughout the book. Let me see if I can find just like a highlighted section. Or Kwang Rochi often used to say, "Close the gap, even just a tiny bit, close the gap. Then everything opens up. Close the gap between what is and what you want it to be, between what is presenting itself and what you want to present itself. This gap of judgment is the separation you feel. You need to totally choose what is and lean into it with your whole being." I think that quote pretty much encapsulates the sentiment of this book, and I definitely recommend it. Not too long of a read, and I think it was very inspiring, and I think I got a lot out of it. The next book I want to talk about is a horror novel called Tender is the Flesh, and this was written by Agustina Bastarica. This book was very grim, but I think it's very, very relevant for just how we consume food and meat. And I'm not personally a vegetarian, but this book definitely made me contemplate it more seriously. It talks about how a virus corrupted the world, which made all animals besides humans inedible. So people are not able to eat meat anymore besides human meat. So there's a whole corporate push to legalize the consumption of human beings and really marginalizing certain populations of humans to be consumed by people, and how it's become completely normalized. The propaganda pushes it to really make it seem like this is the way to go, how it really impacts people's psychology about themselves, what it means to be alive, what it means to have empathy for other people, creating boundaries between yourself and others around you. The protagonist is definitely not a perfect person at all. You really see that throughout the novel unfolding. Very quick read, I think. I mean, I read it in a couple days, but it's not too long, but it's very, very dark. If you want to give it a shot, go for it. If it sounds like a compelling narrative, kind of what I talked about is front and center. I mean, the main character is literally a butcher. He works in the meat department. So yeah, you're going to be seeing a lot of dark things in this book if you read it. The next book that I read pretty recently was Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. He was one of the late Roman emperors in the 2nd century AD. And these are basically his journal entries that he wrote throughout the latter part of his life. A lot of fundamental concepts of Stoicism are in this book, and I think he had some very, very interesting and very well thought out concepts about just reality and going with nature and not trying to have too much control. I think he's also a product of his time as well. He was bred to be a leader. He owned slaves. He fought in battles, so definitely has a lot of derivatives from those kind of realities that he lived within. That's definitely an important thing to note when reading the book. Through those lens and kind of looking aside from some of those concepts, I think it was a very good read, and I definitely got a lot out of it for my own personal life and just viewing reality and kind of accepting things and being able to live with what is. So Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, definitely a good intro into philosophy. The next one I want to talk about is The Sane Society by Erich Fromm. This was written in the 50s, and Erich Fromm was a professor of psychology, I believe, and he really does delve into a lot of sociology and just the way our society runs and how it's not really designed to allow people to really thrive with just living and, you know, just being a cog in the machine and being detached from the outcome of your labor. This was written over 70 years ago, and I think it's more than relevant reading it today. I think he definitely predicted a lot of what would happen, a lot of disconnection between people and really a lack of community. And there are so many nuggets of wisdom and just interesting concepts to think about throughout this novel. Couple quotes that I highlighted just skimming through the book. How can a sensitive and alive person ever feel secure? Because of the very conditions of our existence, we cannot feel secure about anything. Our thoughts and insights are at best partial truths, mixed with a great deal of error, not to speak of the unnecessary misinformation about life and society to which we are exposed almost from the day of birth. Our life and health are subject to accidents beyond our control. If we make a decision, we can never be certain of the outcome. Any decision implies a risk of failure, and if it does not imply it, it has not been a decision in the true sense of the word. We can never be certain of the outcome of our best efforts. The results always depend on many factors which transcend our capacity of control. Just as a sensitive and alive person cannot avoid being sad, he cannot avoid feeling insecure. The psychic task which a person can and must set for himself is not to feel secure, but to be able to tolerate insecurity without panic and undue fear. So that's kind of one of the psychological components of the book that doesn't talk directly about the economy and capitalism and political structures. I think a lot of the basis of the book is very philosophical and psychological. And then through the latter half of the book, it really does talk about how we can reshape society to better operate and better allow people to thrive. So definitely a very interesting book, very insightful. I know there's a lot of potential arguments for the book, against the book and against some of his ideas, but I think it was very insightful for me personally and definitely recommend it. The next book is fantasy. It is the second Stormlight Archive book, Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. I really just recently finished this book, and I think it was a really good read, especially as a sequel to the Way of Kings, and just a lot of character development, a lot of world building. The plot is it just keeps going, and I feel like it's shaped perfectly, and there's so many different narratives happening all at once in different POVs, The book itself is pretty long. It's 1,300 pages, so it's definitely not a short read, but I think within every page, it's just very well written and very engaging, very entertaining, and I think it has some good messages too about really shaping the person that you want to be, looking at things more optimistically. I think Brandon Sanderson always instills some nuggets of optimism in his writing, and I really do appreciate that, because I think a lot of modern day fantasy, especially what I've read, like the Game of Thrones series, The Song of Ice and Fire, are very dark, but in those books, very, very hopeful as well in a lot of its undertones. But it's always a feel-good read for me reading Brandon Sanderson, so definitely rate it pretty high. If you are interested in the Stormlight Archive, if you're interested in epic fantasy, definitely give the series a try. I think it's really good. I'm reading the third book right now, Oathbringer. And the 10th and final book that I want to talk about is The Sunrise on the Reaping. It's the most recent Hunger Games installment. I just finished this book yesterday, and I really do have to say it was a very, very good read. Very enjoyable, but very dark at the same time. It wasn't easy to read. It was very emotional, a lot of gravity, a lot of death, a lot of the brutal reality of a lot of systems, and the way the Hunger Games world is built itself is very scoped on polarity and a regime censoring and taking control over a large amount of people. And we definitely see the parallels with history and reality today. So I think it's definitely a good warning sign, but it goes over the history of Haymitch, who is Katniss and Peeta's mentor in the original trilogy. So it takes place 25 years before that whole sequence of events. And we really do see the Hunger Games in not as rough of a lens as the President Snow story. I didn't read that book, I only watched the movie. Not as kind of old-fashioned as that time, but a bit more rough than what we see in the original Hunger Games. Things aren't as perfectly polished, and we definitely see that the Capitol are not the brightest at designing these games to be as effective as they want them to be. And we see that the tributes are able to outsmart the Capitol in a lot of ways, but ultimately the Capitol does have power, and they do have the iron fist of just their technological advancements compared to the District, which we know from the original trilogy. If you've read or watched the movies there, definitely recommend the book. I think it adds a lot more context to Catching Fire, and just to Haymitch as well. It adds a lot of world building to the Capitol and to the games and the foundations of them. I think it's more of a political book than maybe the first Hunger Games book, but it does follow a very similar plot in that Haymitch is reaped, he goes into the games, kind of the outcome of that. But I think it spends a lot more time before the games and after the games. The games are, I think, only about a third of the book, and definitely a very quick read in that regard. The games are always very, very gruesome, but you can't really stop reading. So I definitely recommend that book if you haven't read it, or if you're thinking about jumping back into the Hunger Games world. So those are my 10 books that I've read this year that I want to talk about. I've listened to a couple other audiobooks, but besides that, these are the main books I've read so far. So I kind of just want to share my thoughts. If you're still watching this, I hope you enjoyed hearing my thoughts, or if you found any book that you resonate with or that you've already read. I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments. Feel free to hit the like button and subscribe. We are pushing to 2,000 subscribers, which is absolutely crazy. And anyways, without further ado, I'll leave you guys to the rest of your day. Hope you have a good one. Take care, everyone. Peace.